Welcome to another of my true crime tales, and for this video we're going to make our way to the very epicentre of Jack the Ripper's London and pay a visit to the historic 10 Bells, a hostelry that in name at least has been in existence since the 18th century, albeit the pub actually stood a short distance further to the north from its current location until the 1850s. The pub's name is derived from the number of bells in the tower of Christ Church, Spitalfields, opposite. Originally, it was known as the 8 Bells Alehouse, and when in 1788 the church installed a new set of chimes consisting of 10 bells, the pub changed its name accordingly. Although the number of bells in the church was at one stage increased to 12, and then reduced back to 8 following a fire in 1836, the pub opted not to follow suit, and has remained the 10 Bells ever since. The 10 Bells does have connections to the Jack the Ripper case, so much so that in 1976 the pub actually changed its name to the Jack the Ripper before reverting back to its original name in 1988. However, our story unfolded almost 60 years before the Whitechapel murders brought fear and panic to the surrounding streets, in an age when another terror prowled the nighttime shadows, not just in the East End of London, but across the whole country. So come with me as we venture back to the 16th of December 1828, when Benjamin King, night watchman for the Church of St. George's in the East, and 2 companions stopped off at the 10 Bells to enjoy a libation prior to King beginning his shift. But before we begin the story proper, a little context is called for. In the early 19th century, medical science was making huge strides forward, and more people were interested in becoming physicians or surgeons. Of course, the only way to gain knowledge of anatomy was to study the human body, and medical schools needed an ever-growing supply of cadavers to dissect and experiment on. The only legal source of corpses for dissection was from public executions, as the 1752 Murder Act had stipulated that convicted murderers, after they had been hanged, should either be dissected or hung in chains, the latter known as gibbeting. These were meant to act as posthumous punishments, in that both dissection and gibbeting effectively erased the criminal's identity and deprived their family and friends of the closure afforded by a funeral or the comfort of having a grave to visit, whilst the spectacle of a public dissection or of a corpse rotting in a gibbet would, it was believed, deter those who might be contemplating similar transgressions by reminding them of the fate that might befall them. However, by the early 19th century, fewer people were being sentenced to death, and thus fewer bodies were available to the rapidly expanding medical profession, which posed something of a problem, and which left the field wide open to any entrepreneur who could step nimbly into the void and find a ready source of cadavers, the fresher the better, for the medicos to work on. And striding to the rescue of the profession came the Bodysnatchers, also known as Resurrectionists, unscrupulous individuals who felt no compunction about entering burial grounds and churchyards in the dead of night to exhume bodies, which they would then sell to surgeons, doctors and medical schools at great personal profit. The most famous or infamous of these gentlemen of the night were Burke and Hare in Edinburgh, albeit they weren't technically resurrectionists, as they murdered their victims over a 10-month period in 1828, as opposed to digging their dead bodies up after they had been buried. It was an immensely profitable endeavour. A single fresh body in London, for example, could fetch anything up to 20 guineas, a guinea being £1 and 1 shilling, and this at a time when a weaver was lucky to earn 7 to 10 shillings a week, and a servant might expect to get up to a guinea a week. In short, for a few hours' work in the dead of night, your take-home pay might far exceed that of a servant working from dawn till late at night, and if, as many body snatchers did, you managed to retrieve several bodies from the soil in one night, well, the rewards could be immense. Of course, if you got caught, the punishment would be harsh, but such were the potential profits that many of the resurrectionists could afford to bribe those that might catch them at it, constables, night watchmen and the like, to look the other way when they snuck into the burial grounds under cover of darkness. You can still encounter a few of the old watchhouses outside London's churchyards that were built specifically for a night watchman to sit in and guard the burial grounds beyond from incursions by the body snatchers. And in the crypt of St. Bride's on Fleet Street, you can still admire a rusting iron mortice coffin, designed in such a way as to make it nigh on impossible for a resurrectionist to open it and steal the body, should they have managed to breach the other measures put in place to prevent the prospect of dearly departed parishioners ending up on the dissection table. It was against this backdrop that Benjamin King and his companions took their seats in the 10 bells and lifted their frothing tankards to their lips. Several newspapers carried an account of the proceedings when 2 of the men at the adjacent table, William Parrott and John North, ended up at the Middlesex Sessions House on Clerkenwell Green, charged with attempting to steal a number of bodies from St. George's churchyard. The report that follows appeared in the Morning Post on Saturday the 17th of January 1829. Resurrectionists, wholesale dealers. The subsequent article read, William Parrott and John North were placed at the bar on an indictment charging them with having, on the 16th of December last, opened a grave in the churchyard of St. George's, Middlesex, and taken therefrom the body of a female child of about 9 years of age, with intent to dispose of the same for their lucre and gain. And the indictment charged them in a second count with having unlawfully entered the said churchyard with intent to steal therefrom 14 dead bodies. Mr. Alley, who attended for the prosecution, having stated the case to the jury, called Benjamin King, watchman of St. George's parish, who deposed, On the 15th of December last, 2 of my companions and myself went into the 10 Bells public house at Spitalfields to get some refreshment. While we were there, 4 men, 2 of whom were the prisoners, came into the room in which we were sitting, and after a short time they commenced a conversation, in the course of which they learnt that we were watchmen. After we had sat together for about 2 hours, North asked us if we did not find ours a very unprofitable business and attended with much trouble. I replied that it certainly was rather a troublesome sort of occupation. The prisoner then said if we had any wish to better our situation, they could put us in a way of doing it, and even that night, if we thought proper, they would enable us to realise 70 or 80 shillings. We inquired how, and they then proposed that we should admit them after midnight into the churchyard and permit them to carry away some of the bodies interred therein. We consented for the purpose of entrapping them. North said, I'm damned if we won't make a good thing of it tonight, for I'm determined to have at least 14 of them. One of his comrades said, Don't be covetous, Jack. If we get 8 or 10 of them, we may be very well satisfied. North replied, I shan't be satisfied with 8 or 10, though. I'm determined to have a good swag while I am about it. I'll not have one less than 14, and if the watchmen only stick to us, they shall have 3 shillings for each subject, and there will be 70 shillings smack for them in one night. We appeared, continued the witness, to acquiesce in all they said, and it was ultimately agreed upon that they were to come to the churchyard between 1 and 2 o'clock on the following morning. In the meantime, I disclosed all that had occurred to some of the officers of the parish, and the plan was arranged for the apprehension of the gang. At the hour appointed, the party arrived at the churchyard, having brought with them a cart for the removal of the bodies. By means of ladders they contrived to scale a very high wall, and after they had got on the inside, I joined them, and they immediately proceeded to work. They opened 3 or 4 graves with most extraordinary expedition, but complained that the subjects contained in them were too far gone for their purpose. They at length came to a newly made grave, which having opened, they disinterred from it the body of a girl of about 9 years of age. They took the body out of the coffin and laid it under a tree whilst they went to search for others. They were in the act of disinterring 2 other bodies when I gave a signal, previously agreed upon, to the officers, who instantly ran up and secured myself and the 2 prisoners at the bar, but 2 of the party made their escape. I was taken into custody in order that the Resurrectionists might not suspect that I was the person who had informed against them. 3 other watchmen and the parish officer corroborated the statement made by the last witness. The chairman briefly summed up the evidence and expressed in strong terms his abhorrence at the vile trade which is every day increasing. The jury, after 20 minutes' deliberation, returned a verdict of guilty. The prisoners were sentenced to 9 months' imprisonment and ordered to be kept to hard labour. and thus the curtain came down on the careers of William Parrott and John North. Within 4 years, the death knell, so to speak, would be sounded for body snatching in general. Crimes such as those of Burke and Hare in Edinburgh and the Italian boy murder of 1831 shocked public sensibilities and highlighted the need for change, and led to demands for the government to regulate the supply of bodies for anatomy. In 1832, Parliament passed the Anatomy Act, which gave bona fide physicians, surgeons and medical students legal access to corpses that were unclaimed after death, particularly the bodies of those who had died in hospitals, prisons, asylums and workhouses. Although the act wasn't without opposition, it was, for example, pointed out that it placed paupers whose bodies were not claimed by their relatives on a posthumous par with executed criminals. It did, though, make grave robbing a much less profitable endeavour, as the supply now exceeded the demand, and this, coupled with the dangers of being caught and lynched by an increasingly irate public, effectively ended the practice of body snatching once and for all. It didn't stop workhouse masters from trying to sell the bodies of deceased paupers to anatomists before the relatives had a chance to claim them, and cases involving this practice came before the courts from time to time over the next 41 years. But it did mean that the likes of William Parrott and John North were effectively rendered redundant, and they no doubt sought other nefarious means from which to earn a living. I hope you have found this video interesting. If you have, please be sure to give it a like and subscribe to the channel. It really does make a difference. As always, I'd be delighted to see your observations in the comments section below. I really do enjoy reading them. Thanks for watching, and until we meet again in the dark and mysterious labyrinth of London's true crime underworld, stay safe.